Cadet Jake Miller stepped off the transport ship and felt the cold metal deck plates beneath his boots. The air in Zenith Station tasted different, recycled and sterile, nothing like the fresh breeze back home in Montana. Around him, dozens of alien recruits moved through the docking bay, their strange forms and colors making the place look like some kind of bizarre zoo. Jake adjusted his standard-issue duffel bag on his shoulder and tried not to stare at the eight-legged creature that scuttled past him, leaving a trail of glowing footprints. The station itself was massive, bigger than any building Jake had ever seen. Curved walls stretched up into shadows, and the ceiling disappeared somewhere high above. Strange symbols glowed along the walls in languages he couldn't read. The whole place hummed with energy, and Jake could feel vibrations through the floor from machines he couldn't even imagine. Fresh meat. A voice boomed across the docking bay, speaking in perfect English through some kind of translator device. Jake turned to see a creature that made his stomach do a little flip. Drill Sergeant Vorth Prime stood nearly 10 feet tall, with 4 arms that ended in claws and a face that looked like someone had crossed a praying mantis with a nightmare. His exoskeleton was dark green and covered in scars, and when he moved, Jake could hear the clicking of his joints. The sergeant's compound eyes fixed on Jake with the kind of look a scientist might give a bug under a microscope. "You must be the human," Vorth Prime said, his voice carrying to the translator with mechanical precision. "Smaller than I expected." Jake nodded politely. "Yes, sir. Jake Miller reporting for training." Vorth Prime made a sound that might have been laughter, though it sounded more like grinding metal. Around them, other alien recruits had stopped what they were doing to watch. Jake caught sight of creatures that looked like walking crystals, others covered in fur and sporting multiple tails, and one group that seemed to be made entirely of some kind of flowing liquid held together in roughly humanoid shapes. "The Crucible course," Vorth Prime announced, consulting a digital tablet that looked tiny in his clawed hands, "is designed to break the weak and forge the strong. Most recruits require the full 7-day cycle to complete it. Many do not complete it all." His eyes clicked as they focused on Jake again. "Given your species' reputation and your rather delicate appearance, I am assigning you to the standard difficulty track. Try not to die in the first 24 hours. Jake almost smiled at that. Back home, he'd grown up on a ranch where delicate wasn't a word anyone would use to describe daily life. He'd been bucking hay bales since he was 12, fixing fence in winter storms, and dealing with angry bulls that weighed more than a small car. But he just nodded again. "I'll do my best, sir." The other alien recruits were whispering among themselves now, and Jake caught fragments of their conversation through various translator devices. The walking crystals seemed to communicate through musical tones that got converted to speech. Earth, one of them was saying, "The death world. Gravity nearly 3 times normal. Poisonous atmosphere. Extreme temperature variations." A furry creature with too many eyes shook its head sadly. "Poor thing probably won't last past the environmental chamber. Humans are so fragile outside their natural habitat." One of the liquid beings rippled in what might have been agreement. "I heard their home planet is so dangerous that most galactic species would die just from breathing the air. Can you imagine how weak they must be to evolve in such conditions?" Jake kept his face neutral, but inside he was starting to understand something. These aliens seemed to think that coming from a dangerous world made humans weak, like they were survivors who had been beaten down by harsh conditions. They didn't seem to realize that maybe, just maybe, growing up on a death world might have made humans a little tougher than average. Vorth Prime was still studying his tablet. "Your species has quite the reputation across the galaxy," he said to Jake. "Stories of worlds where the very ground kills anything that touches it, where the weather changes fast enough to trap entire armies. Most civilized species consider Earth to be barely habitable." He looked up from his device. "But do not worry, human. We have made accommodations. The standard track should be manageable for someone of your limitations." Jake shouldered his bag a little higher and followed as Vorth Prime began walking toward what looked like the entrance to the training areas. Behind him, he could hear the other recruits placing bets on how long he would last. The general consensus seemed to be somewhere between 6 hours and 2 days, with most money on the lower end. As they walked deeper into the station, Jake caught his reflection in a polished metal wall. He looked exactly like what he was, a regular guy from Montana who joined the military to see the galaxy. Nothing special, nothing impressive. Just another human recruit ready to give this training course his best shot. He had no idea he was about to completely rewrite the galactic military's understanding of what standard difficulty meant to a Deathworlder. The environmental chamber looked like something out of a science fiction movie. Jake stood at the entrance, staring at a massive room that seemed to stretch on forever, with different climate zones visible through transparent barriers. The first section was already making some of the alien recruits shiver just from looking at it. A frozen wasteland with fake snow swirling around and ice covering every surface. The environmental gauntlet, Vorth Prime announced to the group of nervous recruits, tests your ability to survive in hostile conditions. Each section must be completed in sequence. The Arctic Zone, Desert Zone, Toxic Swamp, and High Altitude Simulation. Most recruits spend 2 hours in each section, with mandatory rest periods between zones. Jake watched as the first group of aliens enter the Arctic section, bundled up in thick thermal suits that made them look like walking marshmallows. They moved slowly, carefully, their breath visible even through their helmet filters. One of the crystal beings was already turning a pale blue color, and they'd only been in there for 5 minutes. "Your turn, human," Vorth Prime said, gesturing toward the equipment room. "Take whatever gear you need." Jake walked over to gear rack and looked at the various thermal suits, heating packs, and breathing apparatus. Back home in Montana, he'd spent plenty of winter mornings checking cattle and whether that would make this look like a warm day. He picked up a standard uniform jacket, not even the thick winter coat, just a regular one, and headed toward the Arctic Zone entrance. "That's it." Vorth Prime's translator crackled with what sounded like concern. "Human, the temperature in that zone is minus 40 degrees. Your species will freeze solid." Jake shrugged. "I'll be fine, sir. It's not that cold." He stepped through the barrier and immediately felt a familiar bite of serious cold. It was definitely chilly, but nothing compared to that February morning when he'd had to fix a waterline break in a blizzard. The fake snow crunched under his boots as he started jogging across the frozen landscape. The course was laid out with various obstacles, ice walls to climb, frozen rivers to cross, and supply caches to locate. From outside the zone, Jake could hear excited chittering and clicking from the watching aliens. Through the transparent walls, he could see Vorth Prime frantically operating some kind of monitoring device, probably checking Jake's vital signs and expecting to see hypothermia setting in. Instead, Jake was actually starting to warm up from the exercise. He climbed over the ice walls without using the provided ropes, crossed the frozen river by simply walking across the ice instead of carefully testing each step, like the manual suggested, and located all the supply caches by following basic navigation principles his grandfather had taught him during hunting trips. 28 minutes later, he jogged out of the Arctic Zone and started stripping off the jacket. "That was nice and cool," he said to Vorth Prime. "What's next?" The drill sergeant's compound eyes were doing something Jake had never seen before. They were actually vibrating. "Next? Human. You were supposed to spend at least 2 hours acclimatizing to that environment. Your core temperature should have dropped to dangerous levels. The medical sensors indicate you actually got warmer during the exercise." Jake nodded. "Yeah, jogging always warms me up, even in cold weather." Without waiting for permission, Jake headed toward the desert section. The heat hit him like opening an oven door, and he could see waves of superheated air rising from the sand dunes inside. Several aliens were crawling through this section on their bellies, covering cooling suits and moving about as fast as snails. One looked like it had simply given up and was lying in whatever shade it could find. Jake walked in and immediately felt at home. This was exactly like the summer he'd worked construction in Arizona, except there was less dust and no angry foreman yelling at everyone to work faster. He started hiking across the dunes at a steady pace, following the marked trail, and stopping at each checkpoint to complete the required tasks. At the first supply station, he found standard military rations, the kind preserved food designed to keep any galactic species alive in an emergency. The warning label had more text than a pharmaceutical commercial, listing dozens of species that could be poisoned by various ingredients. Jake ripped open a packet and took a big bite. It tasted like chicken, sort of if chicken had been processed by a machine that didn't quite understand what flavor was supposed to be. Outside the desert zone, he could see Vorth Prime pulling up screens of data on his tablet, his claws clicking rapidly across the surface. Other drill sergeants had joined him, and they were all staring at whatever information was displayed. Jake caught glimpses of charts and graphs through the transparent wall, and none of the aliens looked happy about what they were seeing. The desert course was supposed to include careful water management, strategic rest stops, and gradual acclimatization to prevent heat stroke. Jake treated it like a pleasant afternoon hike, munching on rations that would put most aliens in a hospital and maintaining a pace that had him finished in 32 minutes. When he emerged from the desert section, Vorth Prime was holding his tablet like it had personally insulted his family. "Human," the sergeant said slowly, "I need to ask you something very important. Are you feeling well? Any dizziness, nausea, or disorientation?" Jake stretched and rolled his shoulders. "I feel great, sir. Really refreshed. This is good exercise." Vorth Prime made a sound like grinding metal mixed with dying computer. On his tablet screen, Jake could just make out what looked like a planetary data file with the header Earth, environmental conditions, and a lot of red warning symbols. The automated training systems have been designed by the galaxy's best military minds over hundreds of years. They were programmed to track recruit progress, adjust difficulty levels, and maintain precise timing for each phase of training. What they were not programmed for was someone completing multiple days' worth of challenges in a single hour. Jake stood at the entrance to the combat simulation arena, where a group of alien recruits were still struggling with basic hand-to-hand combat techniques they'd started learning yesterday. The digital scoreboard above the arena was flashing error messages in 3 different languages, and maintenance robots were scurrying around the walls trying to figure out why their sensors kept insisting that the same recruit had somehow completed 12 separate training modules simultaneously. "Sir," Jake said to Vorth Prime, who was now surrounded by other drill sergeants all talking at once in various alien languages, "what's the next challenge?" Drill Sergeant Klex 9, a massive bear-like creature with metal implants, looked down at Jake with obvious disbelief. "Human, according to our records, you should still be recovering from hypothermia and heat exhaustion. Our medical scanners show you completed environmental adaptation, basic survival skills, emergency first aid, equipment maintenance, and tactical navigation. These are supposed to be separate courses spread across different days." Jake nodded politely. "They were all pretty straightforward, sir. I just followed the instructions and completed each task. Is there something more challenging available?" The drill sergeants exchanged looks that probably meant something significant in their various cultures. Vorth Prime consulted his tablet again, his claws making nervous clicking sounds against the screen. "Very well. Human, perhaps you are ready for advanced training. Report to the Nightmare Survival Maze." Even the name sounded ominous, and Jake could see why when they led him to the entrance. The maze was a massive underground complex that looked like someone had designed it specifically to test every possible fear and survival instinct. Warning signs covered the entrance in dozens of languages, and Jake counted at least 15 different ways the signs tried to explain that recruits could be seriously injured or killed inside. "This maze," announced Drill Sergeant THYSS, a snake-like alien with too many eyes, "contains traps, obstacles, and scenarios designed to break down mental barriers and test true survival instincts. Most recruits require teams of 3 to 6 members and take between 12 and 18 hours to complete. Some never complete at all." Jake looked through the entrance into what appeared to be a dark tunnel with moving walls and strange sounds echoing from deep inside. "Do I get any special equipment?" "Standard survival pack only," THYSS replied. "Food, water, basic tools, emergency beacon if you need immediate extraction." Jake strapped on the pack and headed into the maze. The first section was clearly designed to mess with people's heads. The walls moved randomly. The floor shifted under his feet, and speakers hidden throughout played sounds of screaming, roaring, and other things that were probably supposed to be terrifying. To Jake, it sounded like feeding time at his uncle's farm, except the cows were having a worse day than usual. The trap started almost immediately. Pressure plates triggered swinging blades, Walls shot out spikes, and sections of floor dropped away into pits. Jake's reflexes, honed by years of avoiding angry livestock and moving farm equipment, kicked in automatically. He ducked, dodged, and jumped over obstacles with the same casual awareness he'd used to avoid a charging bull or a falling hay bale. Outside the maze, in the monitoring room, every drill sergeant on the station had gathered to watch the screens. The maze was equipped with hundreds of cameras designed to track recruit progress and ensure their safety. What they were seeing didn't make sense according to any of their training manuals. "He's treating the psychological warfare section like entertainment," Klex, 9 muttered, watching Jake whistle cheerfully while navigating through a corridor designed to induce severe anxiety attacks. "Look at his vital signs," THYSS added, pointing at a screen full of medical readouts. "Heart rate is elevated but stable. Stress hormones are actually lower than when he started. He's relaxing." Jake had reached a section of the maze called the Gauntlet, where recruits face their worst fears manifested through holographic projections and sensory manipulation. The system scanned his brain patterns and created a scenario designed to terrify him specifically. Jake found himself in what appeared to be his family's ranch, but everything was wrong. The sky was the wrong color, the animals looked sick, and his family was nowhere to be found. Instead of panic, Jake felt a familiar problem-solving mode kick in. This was like those nights when storms knocked out power and he had to check on the animals in the dark, or when equipment broke down during harvest season, and creative thinking was the only way to save the crop. He started methodically working through the holographic scenario, treating it like a puzzle to be solved rather than a fear to be overcome. The monitoring systems registered completion of the Gauntlet in 14 minutes. The previous record was 4 hours and 37 minutes. "This is impossible," Vorth Prime whispered, staring at the screens. "The system must be malfunctioning." But the cameras showed Jake emerging from the final section of the maze, looking around with mild curiosity at the exit chamber. He completed the entire nightmare survival maze in 2 hours and 16 minutes, solving every trap, overcoming every psychological challenge, and navigating every deadly obstacle with the same practical approach he'd used to fix a broken fence. As Jake walked out the maze exit, he found himself facing a crowd of alien drill sergeants, all staring at it with expressions ranging from shock to something that might have been terror. "That was interesting," Jake said, unstrapping his survival pack. "The moving walls reminded me of the corn maze back home, except with more sharp things. What's next?" By hour 5, the training station's command center looked like a disaster zone. Emergency lights were flashing, maintenance crews were running between malfunctioning computers, and every senior drill sergeant on the base had abandoned their other duties to crowd around the monitoring stations. The automated training systems were sending error reports faster than the computers could process them, and somewhere in the depths of the station, alarms were going off because the facility's AI couldn't understand how one recruit was completing multiple advanced courses at the same time. Jake stood in the middle of the Leadership Command Center, calmly directing a team of holographic soldiers through a complex rescue mission, while simultaneously monitoring life support systems in a deep space survival simulation. The leadership challenge was designed to test decision-making under extreme pressure. Recruits were supposed to manage resources, coordinate team movements, and maintain morale during a simulated planetary evacuation. Most alien cadets needed 3 days just to understand the basic command structure. Jake was treating it like organizing a barn raising back home. We had to coordinate dozens of people, manage limited supplies, and make sure everyone stayed safe while working toward a common goal. The holographic soldiers responded to his clear, calm instructions with the kind of efficiency that made the monitoring aliens shake their heads in disbelief. "Team Alpha, secure the northern evacuation route," Jake said into his headset, while his hands worked the deep space survival controls on a separate console. "Team Beta, I need you to redistribute those medical supplies. The civilians in Sector 7 are priority 1. Meanwhile, he was rationing oxygen and water for a stranded crew of 30 alien survivors whose ship had been damaged in an asteroid field, calculating consumption rates in his head, like he was figuring out how much feed to buy for cattle during a long winter. Drill Sergeant Vorth Prime stood behind a wall of monitoring equipment, his compound eyes fixed on readouts that showed Jake's vital signs. Heart rate steady, blood pressure normal, stress hormones at baseline levels. After 5 hours of nonstop advanced training that should have left any recruit exhausted and shaking, the human appeared to be having a relaxing afternoon. "This cannot be accurate," muttered Drill Sergeant X Prime, a crystalline being whose body was currently flickering between different shades of confused purple. "Look at the complexity algorithms. He's processing tactical decisions at rates that exceed our best strategic AIs, while simultaneously managing resource allocation problems that typically require dedicated specialists." On the screens, Jake completed the leadership scenario by successfully evacuating 47,000 simulated civilians with 0 casualties, while maintaining perfect efficiency ratings on the Deep Space Survival Challenge. He looked up from the consoles and stretched like someone who just finished reading a good book. "Sir," Jake called over to Vorth Prime, "I think there might be a bug in the deep space simulation. The oxygen recycling calculations seem off for the Zolarian crew members. Their metabolism should be processing oxygen about 15% faster based on their body mass ratios." Vorth Prime's claws started making rapid clicking sounds against his tablet, a sign of extreme agitation that other alien sergeants had learned to recognize as barely controlled panic. The human was casually pointing out programming errors in systems designed by the galaxy's top military engineers. "I need to make a communication," Vorth Prime announced to the room, his translator crackling with stress. He activated the quantum communications array and waited for the connection to Earth Command to establish. The delay felt like an eternity while alien drill sergeants watched Jake begin what appeared to be another advanced training module, something called Hostile Environment Engineering, that was supposed to be a 3-day intensive course. The communication screen flickered to life, showing a tired-looking human officer sitting behind a metal desk. "Earth Command," Colonel Davis speaking. "What can I do for you, Xena Station?" "Colonel," Vorth Prime began, trying to keep his voice steady through the translator, "I need to inquire about the recruit you sent us. Jake Miller. Is he enhanced in some way? Genetically modified? Cybernetically augmented? Some kind of experimental super soldier?" Colonel Davis looked confused and consulted something off-screen. "Miller? Let me check his file." There was a pause filled with the sound of fingers tapping on a keyboard. "Says here he's from Montana. Worked on a cattle ranch before enlisting. Standard infantry training. Average scores across the board. Nothing special noted. Why? Is there a problem with the performance?" The silence in the monitoring room was so complete that Jake could probably have heard it through the soundproof walls of the training chambers. Every alien drill sergeant stared at the communication screen with expressions of dawning horror. "No problem," Vorth Prime managed to say. "Just routine check-in." "Good to hear," Colonel Davis replied cheerfully. "Miller's a good kid. Little quiet, but reliable. His grandfather says he's always been good with animals and fixing broken things. Hope he's adjusting well to space life." The communication ended, leaving the alien drill sergeants to contemplate a terrifying new reality. If Jake Miller was just a regular human, an average example of his species, then Earth's military potential wasn't just impressive. It represented a complete revolution in galactic warfare capabilities. On the training floor, Jake had somehow started a fourth simultaneous challenge and was asking if anyone had more coffee. The Crucible course completion ceremony had never been held in an emergency medical bay before, but then again, no recruit had ever finished a week-long program in 6 hours and left half the drill sergeant staff requiring psychological counseling. Jake stood at attention in the center of the medical bay, still wearing his standard training uniform that somehow looked fresh despite having completed every challenge the galactic military could throw at him. Around him, alien medical technicians were checking vital signs on various drill sergeants who appeared to be suffering from what their species' equivalent of shock and disbelief. Drill Sergeant Vorth Prime held Jake's completion certificate with claws that were visibly shaking. The document itself was causing problems. The automated printing system had rejected it 4 times because the completion time of 6 hours and 12 minutes was so far outside normal parameters that the computers assumed it was a data entry error. "Recruit Miller," Vorth Prime began, his translator crackling with an emotion that sounded like barely contained terror. "You have completed the Crucible course." "Thank you, sir," Jake replied politely. "It was really interesting. I learned a lot." The medical scanners showed that Jake's heart rate was actually lower than when he'd started that morning. His hydration levels were perfect, his muscle fatigue indicators were minimal, and his stress hormones suggested he was more relaxed than most beings got during vacation time. Dr. KOSS, the station's chief medical officer, kept running the same tests over and over because the results seemed medically impossible. The previous record announced Drill Sergeant Zex Prime in a voice that sounded like breaking glass, was held by Warrior Prime Thok of the Krellian Empire. He completed the course in 166 hours and 43 minutes. This record stood for 78 years. Jake nodded respectfully. He must have been really tough. This Thok guy sounded impressive. The alien drill sergeants exchanged looks that conveyed several layers of panic. Thok the Destroyer was a legendary figure in galactic military history, a warrior whose feats were taught in academy textbooks. Jake had just casually shattered Thok's record by more than 160 hours and was complimenting the previous record holder like he'd barely noticed the achievement. "Sir," Jake continued, looking hopefully at Vorth Prime, "I was wondering if there might be any advanced courses available? I feel pretty good, and it's still early in the day. Maybe something more challenging." Dr. KOYSS made a sound that his translator converted to something like a dying mechanical wheeze. On his medical displays, he was reviewing scans that showed Jake had somehow gotten stronger during the training rather than weaker. His bone density had increased, his muscle efficiency had improved, and his nervous system was functioning at levels that exceeded baseline measurements from when he'd arrived. "More challenging," Vorth Prime repeated slowly, as if the words were in a language he didn't understand. "Yes, sir," Jake said enthusiastically. "Maybe something that takes a full day? I know I've got a lot to learn, and I'd hate to waste the opportunity while I'm here." Behind the observation windows, every senior officer on the station had gathered to watch this conversation. Fleet Admiral Corks, 9, the station commander, was holding an emergency meeting with his staff while simultaneously drafting urgent communications to Galactic Command. The implications of Jake's performance were staggering. If this was what a regular human could accomplish, then every military assessment of Earth's capabilities needed to be completely rewritten. Admiral Corks, 9, activated his communication console and began typing a priority message to Galactic Military Council. "Urgent. Previous threat assessments of species designation human require immediate and comprehensive revision. Recommend emergency session of War College Strategic Planning Committee. Current training protocols insufficient for human capabilities. Request guidance on restructuring academy programs." Meanwhile, Jake was still waiting politely for an answer about advanced courses. He'd noticed that all the alien drill sergeants seemed upset about something, and he was starting to worry that he'd somehow done something wrong. Back home, when adults got this quiet and serious, it usually meant someone was in trouble. "Sir," Jake said carefully, "did I mess up something in the course? I try to follow all the instructions exactly, but maybe I missed something important." Vorth Prime's compound eyes focused on Jake with an expression that seemed to combine admiration, terror, and something that might have been despair. "No, Recruit Miller, you did not mess up anything. You performed adequately." The understatement of the millennium hung in the air, while maintenance robots scurried around fixing training equipment that had been damaged by Jake's impossibly rapid completion times. In the background, alien medics were administering calming drugs to drill sergeants who were having difficulty processing what they'd witnessed. "Actually," Vorth Prime continued, his voice sounding hollow to the translator, "we are going to need some time to develop new training materials appropriate for your skill level. Perhaps you should take some leave time while we prepare advanced curricula." Jake's face lit up with genuine happiness. "That's great, sir. I could visit some of the other parts of the station, maybe learn about different alien cultures. This place is amazing." As Jake left the medical bay with his completion certificate, Admiral Corks, 9, was already receiving responses from Galactic Command. The message was short but clear. "Convene emergency session immediately. All human military assessments classified, pending review. Do not allow any additional human recruits to begin training until new protocols established." Outside the medical bay, Jake was asking a maintenance robot for directions to the station's cultural center, excited to learn more about the galaxy he'd just proven humanity was ready to defend.